Pulling that trigger and killing them people, I believe it would happen again.
There are some crimes so brutal, so senseless, that they stain the history of an entire state. And the case I'm covering today is exactly that. The Alday murders, a tragedy that stands as one of the darkest chapters in Georgia's history, and one of the most horrific crimes imaginable. It wasn't just a crime that ended lives. It shattered the illusion of safety for an entire community and left a scar that's still felt to this day. How did a well-known, hardworking family of 6 in rural Seminole County, Georgia, cross paths with a group of escaped prisoners from Maryland in the spring of 1973? Nearly an entire family wiped out, a community left in shock, and a crime so vicious, so calculated, that it still haunts those who remember the headlines and the whispers that followed. This is considered to be one of the deadliest mass murders in Georgia's history. And the ripple effects didn't stop there. This case would eventually connect with the man who would become Georgia's longest-serving death row inmate, waiting decades for his execution as the state and the courts wrestled with the weight of justice for what happened that one day. Today we're diving into what unfolded inside the Alday family home, the manhunt and the investigation that followed, and the unimaginable darkness that led to the murders of an entire family on a quiet farm in southwest Georgia. One thing is certain, the gavel has fallen. This is Final Judgment. I'm Nichole Mondshein, and this is Final Judgment, a deep dive into the final days, last choices, and chilling moments before execution on Georgia's death row. Some convictions unravel while some sentences are overturned. The evidence has been laid bare, the jury has spoken. But was justice truly served? For some, there's no appeal, no second chances, just the final judgment. But for others, the final judgment isn't so final after all. Donaldsonville, Georgia is the kind of small town where everyone knows everyone. You know your neighbors, and your neighbors know you. Tucked away in the southwest corner of the state, surrounded by pine trees, dirt roads, and endless fields, it's an agricultural hotspot. It was a place where people left their doors unlocked and neighbors looked out for one another. Back in the 1970s, life there moved slowly, very slowly, centered around family, church on Sundays, and working the fields, farmland, or at the local mills. Currently, around 2,000 people live in Donaldsonville today, so you can only imagine how much smaller it was back in the 1970s. So back then, news traveled fast. So when the Alday family was brutally murdered in 1973, it wasn't just a crime. It was a tragedy that shattered and broke an entire community and left a mark that's still felt today. And it wasn't the kind of place where anyone expected to hear about one of the worst mass murders in Georgia's history. But in May of 1973, that's exactly what happened to the Alday family, a family that everyone knew in Seminole County. The Aldays weren't just another family in town. They had been farming the land near the Chattahoochee River for over a century, living a life built on faith, family, and hard work. They were deeply woven into the fabric of the community, respected for their kindness, passionate about farming and their crops, and known for their willingness to help anyone in need. If you needed a hand, a member of the Alday family would be there, no questions asked.
They wouldn't hurt or flee. They'd help anybody that needed help. They had no interest in doing anything other than just farming, just doing, I guess you'd say they were pure.
Faith wasn't just a part of their life, it was at the center of it. They were pillars at the Spring Creek Baptist Church, a church that Ned Alday, the patriarch of the family, helped build. The Alday men each served in their own way. One was the chairman of the deacons, another was the Sunday school superintendent, one led the singing and the choir, another led the training union, while another kept the books as the church clerk and treasurer. Church wasn't just a place that they went. It was a part of who the Aldays were. Faith and religion were everything to them. At the head of the family was 62-year-old Ned Alday, known for his love of fishing and playful spirit, always ready with a joke to keep his kids laughing. Ned was the father of Jerry, Jimmy, and Chester. His oldest son, Jerry, was 35 and was a talented singer who led music at the church and was known for being sharply dressed, even sewing his own clothes to fit him just right. He was definitely the fashionista and perfectionist of the family. And then there was Chester, or his family liked to call him Shuggy, who was 32 years old. He was the family's jokester who could lighten up any room. And then there was Jimmy, and at 25, he was the adventurous one, always climbing trees, exploring the woods, and cooking whatever he caught over a small fire. Their Uncle Aubrey, who was Ned's brother, he was 57 years old and was known for his big, bright smile and playful pranks that kept life on the farm light and fun. And then there was Mary, Jerry's 26-year-old wife, a graceful, kind woman known for her cooking and the way she quietly cared for everyone around her. She also worked as a social worker, so she helped out a lot of people in the community. Their days were simple but full, working on the family farm, sharing meals, helping neighbors, and gathering together at church. They lived close, worked together, worshiped together, cooked together, and supported one another. The Aldays were never apart. They were the kind of family who made you feel welcome, one who would give you the shirt off their back, and those who truly believed in living out their faith through kindness and service to others.
They never give us no trouble. And our mother would come up and visit us different times. Never give no trouble at all.
Pretty good neighbors then, in other words.
Yeah, they're pretty good neighbors.
You feel the boys were raised correctly?
Right. The boys was raised up like any other kid should been. But why did they do this?
How did the boys act at home?
They act real good. They was brought up, raised real good. They listened till they got old enough to be on their own. And then when they went out, you tell them something, they stand and laugh at you.
But they never gave you any trouble when they lived in this particular neighborhood?
No, they never give us no trouble.
Before that fateful day in May, no one could have imagined the horror that would come to their quiet farmhouse. Escaped prisoners who should have never been there shattered the safety of not just the Alday family, but the entire community. Donaldsonville was forever changed, forever scarred, left grappling with how much darkness could find its way to their doorstep, literally. And even decades later, when people talk about the Aldays, they remember the laughter that they brought, the kindness that they shared, and the faith that held them together. They remember a family that truly lived, and lived well, and loved well, a legacy that still echoes in Seminole County today. But before we get into what actually happened that day, I think it's important to understand who the men were that brought this horror to the Alday family's doorstep. Because this tragedy didn't begin in Donaldsonville, Georgia. No. It started hundreds of miles away in Maryland with a group of prison escapees who were already on the run, leaving chaos and violence in their wake as they made their way down south. These men had nothing in common with the Aldays, except for the moment when their paths would violently cross. They were desperate, dangerous, hostile, violent, and looking for a way to keep running. And they didn't matter who that they hurt in the process. And as fate would have it, their path led them straight to the Alday family farm that fateful day, setting the stage for a tragedy that would forever change and haunt the quiet town of Donaldsonville. If we're going to understand how this all spiraled into the nightmare it became, we need to start with Carl Isaacs, because out of this group, Carl was the ringleader, the one with the plan, the one who wasn't afraid to take what he wanted, and the one the others followed as they made their way down south to Georgia. His story and the rough, violent path that led him from a broken childhood to prison break set everything else into motion. Carl Isaacs grew up in the shadows of poverty and chaos, bouncing between foster homes and the streets, learning early on that if he wanted something, he'd have to take it, and also would have to fend for himself. Trouble seemed to follow him everywhere he went. or maybe he was always chasing it. And by the time he was a teenager, Carl was already well on his way to becoming the kind of man who would stop at nothing to break rules, but also stay free. By the age of 19, Carl had spent most of his life bouncing between foster homes and juvenile detention centers near the Maryland-Pennsylvania border. His dad had abandoned his family when he was just a young kid, leaving Carl and his younger brother Billy in a chaotic, unstable home. At one point, Carl even had to prostitute himself out to a local pedophile in exchange for a place to stay after running away from one of those foster homes that he was living in. Carl had also been diagnosed with depression and had low self-esteem. He was very hostile toward women and found it very hard for himself to control his anger most of the time. Carl and his brother were constantly in trouble. Truancy, petty theft, and breaking into homes became a pattern for both of them early on. Trouble was basically in their blood. By 15, Carl was already getting adult charges for stealing cars, and by early 1973, when he was 19 years old, he found himself back behind bars for burglary at the Maryland State Penitentiary. But only 2 days after arriving at the Maryland State Penitentiary, Carl endured a brutal assault and was gang raped for over 8 hours when a riot broke out. This led him to being transferred to the Maryland Correction Camp, and then he was transferred to a lower security facility, Poplar Hill Correctional Institute, which is located right outside Baltimore, Maryland. And this is where he would find his half-brother, 26-year-old Wayne Coleman. Now, Wayne's story wasn't much different than Carl's. He also grew up poor and without a father around, bouncing between construction jobs before landing in prison for burglary and robbery. At Poplar Hill, Wayne introduced Carl to 36-year-old George Dungy, a man who had a mild intellectual disability and, just like the others, also had a rough life of his own. George grew up in Baltimore with a single mother, working long hours to keep them afloat. He struggled in school, bounced around low-paying jobs, and eventually landed in prison for failing to pay child support. And that's when, inside prison walls, Carl came up with a plan to escape, and he had to include Wayne, and Wayne was in. But he was only in on one condition. George had to come along with them because at that point, Wayne and George had allegedly become somewhat romantically involved. So on May 5th, 1973, around 3 a.m., Carl Isaacs, Wayne Coleman, and George Dungy crawled out of a bathroom window and escaped from the Poplar Hill facility. And what's crazy is the prison didn't even bother to alert local police, thinking that the men weren't dangerous enough to even worry about. And what's shocking now is that if they had alerted local authorities that night, it is likely that would have changed everything. The Alday family more than likely may have never even crossed paths with these men. The men would have likely been captured early on, and the slaughter that followed could have easily been prevented. But since you clicked on this video, we already know that's not exactly what happened. Before disappearing into the woods after escaping from the prison, Wayne had actually managed to get his hands on a .38 caliber pistol. The trio stole a car and headed to Baltimore, where they picked up Carl's younger brother, Billy, from his girlfriend's house. Now, Billy was just 15 years old at the time and had just recently run away from a reform school. Billy idolized Carl, and this was the chance to escape with his big brother, so it felt like a lot of freedom for him. Now, a group of 4, they planned to make their way to Florida, or even Mexico, to start completely over. Wayne specifically mentioned that he wanted to see the ocean. However, the men needed cash, food, and a better car to continue on their journey down south. Then, just 5 days later, the escapees found themselves in McCollensburg, Pennsylvania. It's here they spotted 19-year-old Richard Miller and decided to steal his Chevy Chevrolet. But Richard wouldn't let them take his car so easily, and he tried to intervene. But they weren't going to let that happen. That's when they kidnapped him, drove him to Maryland, and there, Wayne Coleman pulled him from the car and shot him in the head, leaving his body behind in the woods as they continued down their journey down south. 9 days after their escape, the group somehow found themselves drifting into southwest Georgia. Once they started passing through Donaldsonville, That's when they knew it was the perfect place to lay low for a little while before continuing south, since it just seemed like a quiet little town and just out of the way. But no one would find them here, or so they thought. But that decision would set them on a collision course straight to the Alday family. Because while the Aldays were simply living out another ordinary spring day on their farm, these 4 desperate men were driving the back roads of Seminole County, searching for gas, money, and any opportunity to keep running, no matter who they hurt in the process. And when their paths crossed on that May afternoon, it would lead to one of the worst and the most brutal crimes Georgia had ever seen. It was now May 14th, 1973. Just a normal, warm, ordinary spring day on the Alday family farm. Jerry Alday, his father Ned, his brothers Jimmy and Chester, and Uncle Aubrey were out working the fields as they always did. Jerry's wife, Mary, was in town at work, and his mother, Ned's wife, Ernestine, was back at the main house cooking lunch, ready to feed the men before they returned to the fields for the afternoon. But no one could have imagined that by the end of the day, the Alday family would be shattered forever, and that evil, brought by 4 men who should never have been there in the first place, would descend on their quiet farmhouse, leaving a trail of horror that would haunt Donaldsonville for generations. Late in the afternoon, the escapees spotted what looked like a gas pump on the Alday property and decided to stop because they needed gas. But it actually wasn't a gas pump at all, just part of the farm's irrigation system. But that's when they found Jerry Alday's mobile home, which was located on the Alday property. The mobile home appeared to be empty at the time, so that's when Carl and Wayne decided to break in, looking for anything that they could steal, while Billy and George kept watch outside. But it wouldn't be long before Ned and his son Jerry returned to the mobile home for a much needed break after spending the entire afternoon in the fields, completely unaware of the danger that was waiting inside. The 2 men were then forced to the trailer at gunpoint, robbed, and then taken to separate rooms. Carl Isaacs then shot Jerry in the head 4 times, and Ned, his father, was shot once by Wayne Coleman, but he wasn't dead. Somehow he managed to get back up, and he tried to fight off Wayne until Carl stepped in and shot him 5 more times. Then, moments later, Jimmy Alday pulled up on his tractor, ready to help his father and brother prepare for the next day work. But again, Jimmy was unaware of the horrors that were happening inside, and by the point that he found out, his father and brother were already dead. But once he did find out, it would be too late. When Jimmy got to the home, he was immediately forced inside, just like his dad and brother had been, made to sit on the couch, and was shot in the back of the head. The 4 men then were actually almost ready to leave when Mary Alday, Jerry's wife, just so happened to return home from work, carrying groceries from her car. Carl forced her inside at gunpoint and made her sit in the kitchen all at the same time, while Chester and Aubrey just so happened to arrive back at the home in their pickup truck. And just like all the others, both men were led inside one by one. Chester was taken into the room where his father was laying dead and was shot by Wayne Coleman. Aubrey was led to the bedroom where Jerry's body was and was killed by Carl Isaacs, his hand later found draped over his nephew's in death. Now, Mary Alday was the last to die. She was witness to all of this. She was brutally raped by all 4 men inside her home, then taken to a wooded area 6 miles away where she was raped again before George shot her, ending the nightmare she had endured. Her body was left dumped in a large fire ant bed. Before killing her, they took photographs of her with her own camera, which the escapees happened to steal from the mobile home. Now, those images of her brutal attack were later found and used as evidence of the cruelty that she faced in her final hours. Officers would later learn that Carl and George also tortured Mary as well.
And they were hunting gas money and gas, I believe, and they stumbled upon, a good working family where they meet up and farm and have lunch, and it was at the right time at the right place. And, it just happened.
It was senseless. There was no need for them to kill them. If they'd have asked, if they'd have said we need to fill up our gas tank, they'd have let them. You know, they were just that type of people. If they'd have needed a few dollars, they probably would have been given what they needed. But that was not their intention when they went in that trailer that day.
That's when the men had ditched the car they stolen from Richard Miller near where they left Mary's body and then stole Mary's Chevy Impala. The men then fled north, slipping into neighboring Early County, hoping to keep moving before anyone found out what they had done. All while leaving the 6 members of the Alday family dead and a quiet Georgia community forever changed. Meanwhile, back on the property, the Alday wives were in their own homes or nearby, completely unaware of the nightmare that was unfolding. Ernestine, Ned's wife and mother of the Alday sons, had spent the day preparing lunch, expecting the men to return from the farm at the same time as they usually always did. Barbara, Chester's wife, was at her own home, assuming Chester would be home for dinner like every other day. But as the hours passed and none of the men came home, quiet worry turned into fear. Ernestine began calling around, asking anyone she knew if they had seen any of the men, while Barbara drove over to Jerry and Mary's trailer to check, calling out, but she didn't get any answer. Seeing no cars around, she just assumed that the mobile home was empty. No one was home. That's what she thought. So she returned back to her own home, still uneasy. Something just didn't feel right. It wasn't until around 2:30 a.m. that morning that Barbara, Bud Alday, Ned's other brother, and Bud's son, Roy, returned to the trailer to check one last time. But this time, they forced their way inside, and what they found would shatter the family forever. Bodies upon bodies laid inside, silent witnesses to the violence that had ripped through their lives.
Well, the first thing I saw was a beer can sitting up on a little bar and a pair of ladies' panties in the floor. And I saw some legs hanging off a bed, and I just closed the door.
Was there anything about seeing that beer can that caused you any concern?
Didn't nobody drink in the family.
When you went back into the trailer, could you tell us, Mr. Alday, could you tell us what you found inside of the trailer?
Well, whenever we went in the back door, on the right side was a bedroom. And Ned was laying down with his feet hung off the bed. And Jimmy was kind of folded up and had his legs across Ned.
By 2:45 a.m. the morning after, the sheriff was called, and soon state investigators were combing the scene, discovering the 5 murdered Alday men and piecing together the horror that had unfolded. They didn't find Mary's body in the woods until hours later. She was discarded and alone. Evidence that had been left behind included a beer can that was in the sink and Richard Miller's abandoned car. Now, these items quickly pointed and linked investigators to the 4 escaped convicts from Maryland. Within hours, an all-points bulletin went out for Mary Alday's stolen car, naming the 4 fugitives as suspects in these brutal murders. But while the escapees fled west, hoping to lose themselves in the chaos, their luck was soon going to run out. They would end up abandoning Mary's car in Alabama, then they stole another vehicle and just kept on running. They actually also ended up robbing a grocery store along the Virginia-West Virginia border for some cash and guns. And it was there, on a dirt road, that troopers spotted the stolen car and started to chase the 4 men. Then the men fled from the stolen vehicle and started to flee on foot. But they were not going to get very far. George was the first one to get caught, and he was still wearing Mary's watch on his wrist. The others, Carl, Billy, and Wayne, were found sometime later hiding under a cliff by a pack of police bloodhound dogs. All 4 men were quickly arrested while carrying the same exact weapons that would later tie them to the Alday murders. George, who was already in custody by the time that the fellow men were apprehended, had already started to talk, giving details to officers about what they had done in Donaldsonville. Then Wayne confessed to killing Richard Miller back in Pennsylvania before the family massacre even took place. 4 days after the murders, the fugitives were flown to Atlanta, held in separate jails until they were arraigned, and then brought back to Donaldsonville to face 6 counts of murder for each of them. Wayne even reportedly snickered as the charges were read, unbothered by the devastation he and the others had left behind. In an interview years later, Carl would actually admit that they had killed everyone they encountered at the Alday farm. It was never just about the robbery. According to him, it was about avoiding prison at any cost, especially since they had just fled from prison. They were not planning on going back. We figured they couldn't take us back to prison if they couldn't talk, he said. The 4 men were then housed in the Randolph County Jail in Cuthbert, Georgia, until their individual trials began. All 4 men were charged with 6 counts of murder in September 1973, but their outcomes were very different. Billy Isaacs, the youngest, actually ended up cooperating with prosecutors, basically testifying against his brother, Wayne and George, for a lesser sentence. He testified against the others and took a plea deal, getting 20 years for armed robbery instead of facing murder charges. He was released in 1993, but actually died in Florida in 2009 at the age of 51. But before he died, Billy actually wrote a letter to the Alday family apologizing for his and his co-assailants' actions that fateful day.
Dear sir, this letter is sent to you, your family and relatives with the deepest sympathy for the deaths of your loved ones, which resulted by my 2 brothers and their friend. I am the youngest one who was an eyewitness to the deaths of the Alday family, which I testified to in court. I'm sorry for those deaths occurred, for it was a senseless crime. It shouldn't have happened. And then he said, as God is my witness, I send my sympathy for the sorrow you have felt. There is no way I can change what happened, but I want you to know that I'm sorry and regret deeply for what happened. Respectfully yours, Billy Isaacs.
The others, Carl Isaacs, Wayne Coleman, and George Dungy, were all convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Georgia had reinstated the death penalty just 9 months before the Alday murders, so the 3 men actually became some of the first to receive death sentences under this new law. But the case didn't end there. In 1985, more than a decade after the murders, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals overturned their convictions and death sentences. A federal appeals court ruled that they hadn't received fair trials in Seminole County because the community was too inflamed by pre-trial publicity, including the sheriff, who publicly said that he wanted to pre-cook the suspects before executing them. Now, normally, this kind of bias could derail a case entirely, raising real concerns about due process and the right to a fair trial. But in this case, the overwhelming evidence and the confessions from the suspect themselves left little doubt about their guilt, even as the legal system was forced to start over to protect the integrity of the verdict. We've seen similar concerns about pretrial publicity in the Bryan Kohberger case today, where intense media coverage and community and national outrage have raised fair questions about how to ensure a fair trial in high-profile murder cases without undermining accountability.
You get too much pretrial publicity, it will tend to affect the possible jurors, that could be hearing the case, maybe prejudice them one way or the other in it, and so that's why we have to be, and probably because of this case, even throughout up to today, makes us a little more tight-lipped about anything that goes on, here is criminal-wise when it comes to the media. We just don't want to take a chance on causing a problem. And a lot of people don't understand that, especially the media people don't understand, why we can't tell them everything.
The court agreed that there was no doubt about their guilt, but ruled that even guilty people, in this case, the worst of the worst, still deserve a fair trial. And as sure as you can imagine, This decision infuriated many in South Georgia who felt that the justice system was failing the Alday family, but the courts were clear. The trials had to be redone.
Well, I feel like they're guilty. And I would like to see them come to trial as quick as possible. And I'd like to see the court do justice.
I can't say that my boys didn't do it, because if they say they done it, they done it. Because I can't doubt anybody's word. Because if they got fingerprints and stuff, then they have done it. I mean, that's the way I feel.
There's no reason on the Alday part for it being done. Because Alday, they don't bother anybody.
I feel sorry for these poor people. Anybody that comes out of a field that's working and shot down for nothing, for no reason, and why, it's terrible. If they done this crime, the way I feel, they should be punished. Down deep in my heart, yes. Because if they're not punished and get out, they'll liable to do worse than what they've done before, what they've done now. Because it's a shame what they have done now, let alone get out here and do something else.
If they're found guilty, would you want to see the death penalty imposed?
That's left up to the court. I don't have no say-so with that.
Do you feel any vindictiveness towards these four men?
No. Nothing, but I feel like they should be punished. I think they could get just as fair a trial in Donaldsonville as they could anywhere in the world. I believe they'd get as good a trial here as they would in New York.
I really don't know what kind of a trial or safe it will be. But whatever it be, it'll be. They'll have to take it. That's all I can say.
Well, I think it shook the whole town. And everybody has really been hurt. Because the family was well known. And most of the business that they did was here in town. And everybody knew it.
Talk of the trials being unfair does not sit well in Seminole County, especially in the Alday family. Bud Alday asked that we not photograph him during our interview.
I feel like that whenever a crime is committed, for example, like Seminole County, and they get a fair trial and everything like these boys did, it ought to be carried out. The county ought to have to say so, not some judge sitting up in Atlanta or Washington somewhere.
So in 1988, over a decade after the murders, the three men were retried.
So, at that point, it had been like 12 years, and we've been waiting 12 years for something to happen. And what happened was everything got thrown out, and there was just this fear of, oh my God, what if they get out? Like, why is this happening? And, how can they admit to being guilty, but then they get another trial? Like as a child, those are the things that don't make sense.
Carl Isaacs was retried in Perry, Georgia, and once again, he was sentenced to death.
I know I don't have a future. I mean, I might stay upstairs a couple years waiting on appeal, but I'm ready to go. If there's no other way out, which I doubt, I'd rather for them to go ahead and get it over with. That's better than make me sit upstairs and suffer and wait some.
Now, Wayne Coleman's retrial ended in another conviction. His jury in DeKalb County convicted him again, but they couldn't agree on the death penalty, so he received 6 consecutive life sentences. During George Dungy's retrial in 1988, prosecutors were barred from seeking the death penalty altogether because Georgia had recently passed a new law that prohibited executing individuals with intellectual disabilities. Now, his attorneys were able to prove that George had met the criteria under this law, which had gone into effect earlier that year. So, as a result, George pleaded guilty to the murders and was sentenced to 6 life sentences, 3 to run consecutively. It was understood that he would never be paroled and would spend the rest of his life in prison. While the others settled into their sentences, Carl Isaacs' time on death row dragged on for nearly 30 years, making him not only the longest-serving death row inmate in Georgia's history, but also the longest man on death row in the United States for some time. Now, during those years, he filed appeal after appeal, trying to get his sentence overturned or reduced. But every time, each was denied. Meanwhile, the Alday family and the Donaldsonville community waited, frustrated as justice felt endlessly delayed. Finally, in 2003, the state set Carl Isaacs' execution date. Carl was executed by lethal injection at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification State Prison on May 6, 2003. He was 49 years old, and his execution actually marked the first time in Georgia's history that victims' family members were allowed to witness the execution. Members of the Alday family stood outside the prison that day, saying it felt like a chapter was finally closing after decades and decades of pain. 3 members of the extended Alday family were actually able to witness the execution from inside the death chamber, while more than 60 relatives waited outside the prison in a caravan of 6 cars and even a bus. 18 state and local officers were also on hand.
The emotions, just the feeling of being there was not something I ever want to feel again, I don't think. But I'm glad that I could be there for my mom. I'm glad I could be there with my family in such a critical closure to our family. That was what was important to me.
Carl did not request a final meal and instead received the standard prison tray: pork with macaroni, pinto beans, cabbage, carrot salad, a dinner roll, chocolate cake, and fruit punch, which he reportedly pushed away without eating. During his execution, Carl Isaacs appeared calm and even lighthearted. Witnesses even reported that he was laughing and talking as the restraints were secured. He chose not to make a final statement, but did ask a prison chaplain to say a prayer, to which he quietly responded with, "Amen." After the prayer, and while the drugs filled his veins, he looked around the room, took a deep breath, shuddered, and then passed away. In a last-ditch effort to avoid execution altogether, Carl's attorneys argued that nearly 3 decades on death row amounted to cruel and unusual punishment. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a brief stay shortly before 7 p.m., but minutes later lifted it without comment, allowing the execution to go forward. Carl Isaacs took his last breath shortly after 8 p.m. and was legally declared dead by 8:07 p.m. Jack Martin, Carl's defense attorney, witnessed the execution and told reporters afterward, "I just saw a person being killed by the citizens of Georgia. We have become one with the killers, and we are all the lesser for it." The Alday family strongly rejected Carl's attorney's remarks, with Paige Barber, Ned Alday's granddaughter, saying that the execution was too humane. And she did not bring, the execution to her did not bring true justice. She emphasized that the real cruel and unusual punishment was what her family had to endure, waiting for nearly 30 years of legal battles and waiting for his execution. While Carl's attorney expressed that the execution wouldn't make the public safer or bring comfort to the family, the state's attorney general called the execution the closing of a tragic chapter in Georgia's history. As for the others, George Dungy died in prison in 2006 of a heart attack at the age of 68. Buried in the prison cemetery with no family to claim him. Wayne Coleman is actually still alive today, serving his life sentences at the Wilcox State Prison. He is technically still eligible for parole, but has been denied every time. The slain members of the Alday family are buried in a family plot at the Spring Creek Baptist Church Cemetery in Seminole County. They are remembered with gray marble headstones all lined up right next to one another. But the tragedy didn't end there. The heartbreak extended beyond those 6 graves. It's actually truly heartbreaking. While 6 Alday family members were brutally murdered that day, the devastation didn't stop there. Mary's mother, Alberta Lane Campbell, was shielded from the horrific details of how her daughter died, but the day after the funerals, she learned the truth. Now, the weight of that grief was simply too much for her to bear. And just 5 days after Mary was killed, Alberta passed away too. Even the family's loyal dog, Tug, couldn't survive the heartbreak. After the murders, Tug wandered around the farm, eventually dying, having grieved himself to death. While she didn't lose her life that day, Ned's wife, Ernestine Alday, lost a part of herself. The life she loved was gone in an instant, replaced by an uncertain future no one could have prepared for. Known for her deep faith and unwavering kindness, she never spoke ill of the men responsible for taking her husband and 3 sons, and she wouldn't let others do it either, believing firmly that God had a purpose in everything, even in tragedy. When people asked how she managed to survive such an unthinkable loss, she would simply say, "What choice did I have?" She chose to keep going, holding her family close and building new memories with her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Still, despite her fate, she often said she hoped to live long enough to see Carl Isaacs brought to justice for what he had done. But she passed away in 1998, just a few years before that day finally came. Her faith anchored her, and even after everything, she chose forgiveness, believing God had carried her through and that forgiving was necessary to move forward. Her quiet strength became a lasting example for her family and community, showing that even in the face of an unimaginable tragedy, faith and love could guide you through the darkest moments. It's a reminder that the ripples of violence go far beyond the crime scene. The Alday family lost 6 loved ones that day, but the grief claimed so many more in the days that followed. This case wasn't just about the murders themselves. It was about how evil tore through an entire family and an entire community, leaving a trail of heartbreak that can still be felt today. For the surviving Alday family, the aftermath of that tragic day was overwhelming. The farm, which had been in their family for over 100 years, was eventually sold. No one was left to tend to it. It became yet another heartbreaking loss tied to this case. But from that pain, Paige Barber, Ned's granddaughter, has built a powerful legacy. She's made it her life's work to keep her family's story alive and to advocate fiercely for victims of crimes. In 2003, Paige helped pass the Alday Family Bill, which requires the state to update victims' families twice a year on death penalty cases, something that was nearly impossible before the law.
There were several representatives who were like, "How can we help you?" And one of those was Bob Irvin from Atlanta. Like, he wasn't even in our district, you know, he was from a completely different district, but he said, you know, I'm going to sponsor this bill that's going to make it mandatory for the state to notify families of like habeas corpus. Like, when there's a capital punishment case, you have to let them know what's going on.
Paige's work in criminal justice started back in 1998 when she became a probation officer. Over time, her focus shifted from punishment to healing. With nearly 3 decades of experience in addiction counseling and behavioral programs, she's an internationally certified addiction counselor and a medication-assisted treatment specialist. Her mission is clear: help people caught up in the justice system before they become victims or cause harm, trying to break the cycle of pain. In 2015, Paige took part in Georgia's Victim Offender Dialogue program and actually met with Wayne Coleman himself. Again, one of the men convicted in the case. That meeting gave her insight into missed chances for intervention and treatment, reinforcing her belief that understanding root causes is essential to preventing future tragedies.
Going in, when I heard about the program, I thought about it for a long time, actually, before I decided to, you know, that I wanted to try to have a conversation. At that point, the only one still alive was Wayne Coleman, so that was who I was, you know, had to sit down with, and I spent a long time preparing for that. All my life, all of them were bigger than life. They were the boogie monster. They were the one to be afraid of. All my life, I lived in fear that they were going to get out and harm my family or break into our house. So at the point that I finally sat down with him, you know, being a lot older, I just remember looking at him and thinking, like, he's just a little old man. But what I gained from that experience was I got a chance to hear his side of it, and he told me things that were pretty brutal to hear, but he didn't sugarcoat it, and he expressed remorse to me directly. He said, "I'm so sorry. If I could take it all back, I would." But bigger than that, you know, I got a chance to pray with him at the end. And that was something that I had not expected to do, but something I just felt really led to do was to talk to him about Christ. And I think that that's something that my family would have really wanted.
Now, to honor her family's legacy, she founded the River Road Counseling and Consulting Services. She calls her approach the Alday effect, the idea that with compassion and support, those struggling with addiction and criminal behavior can change, ultimately protecting others from harm. Through this work, she continues her family's tradition of giving back while advocating for victims' rights and meaningful justice has become a lasting part of this case's legacy.
Definitely there are some people who commit crimes that need to be locked up for the rest of their life, for public safety reasons and others. But a lot of people who commit crimes, they're not going to be locked up forever. They're going back on the street. With the advocacy that I do, I really am looking at the big picture. Like I want people to get what they need, but I also, on a selfish level, I hope that by helping those who are in the criminal justice system, that I'm also going to be helping potential crime victims as well.
The Alday murders left a legacy that extended far beyond Seminole County. In the 1970s, while working on a documentary about this case, filmmaker Fleming Tex Fuller actually interviewed Carl Isaacs while he was on death row. And during that interview, Carl chillingly admitted that he had raped Mary and shot Jerry, Ned, and Aubrey. Even more disturbing, he said that if given the chance, he would have killed the Aldays again, saying coldly, "The only thing the Aldays ever did that stood out was getting killed by me." These recorded confessions later became key evidence during his retrial.
If you had it to do all over again, do you really honestly think that it would have turned out differently if you had anything to do about it?
Well, it would turn out different in some ways. As far as pulling that trigger and killing them people, I believe it would happen again.
That same reporter who interviewed Carl believes that Carl actually may have been involved in as many as 13 murders before landing on death row, and that includes the Alday family as well as Richard Miller. In 1977, the filmmaker released Murder One, a television documentary featuring Carl Isaacs and other inmates facing the death penalty. The story was later adapted into the 1988 film Murder One, which was shown across North America but intentionally kept out of Southwest Georgia out of respect for the local community. Although the Alday family strongly objected to the books and the film at the time, the attention ultimately helped the legal case against all of the accused, but especially for Carl. Today, the Alday family's memory remains deeply woven into the fabric of Seminole County and throughout Georgia. The tragedy left such a mark on the community that even now, mentioning the Alday name instantly brings the case to mind, along with the weight of what happened that day.
We're doing this interview in the Seminole County Ag Building, which was donated in memory of the Alday family, and there was a large ceremony done at the time, and the whole family gathered, and it's just a tribute of the impact that the Alday family had on agriculture and the FFA and the Young Farmers department in Seminole County. I mean, they were avid participants in everything, and still to this day you can say their name and you'll hear a story about when they were in FFA or when they were on the phone.
For many who still live in that corner of Georgia, the story of the Aldays continues to evoke a quiet reverence and a reminder of the lasting impact of violence on families and small communities. A monument for the Alday family was installed in 2017 on River Road, about 14 miles southwest of Donaldsonville, near the place where the family members lost their lives back in 1973. The monument stands as a reminder of the tragedy, but also reflects the enduring legacy of the Alday family in the community, honoring their values of faith, family, and the resilience that they left behind. These murders changed Seminole County forever, but the family's memory has become a quiet thread of resilience that still runs through the community. Their story is a reminder of how violence can ripple outward, touching every corner of a small town, and how justice can feel painfully slow for those left behind. Yet, in the face of an unimaginable loss, the Alday family chose to honor their loved ones by pushing for change, sharing their story and working to support other victims' families so that no one would have to walk the same road alone. 3 men slipped away from a Maryland prison, moving across state lines like shadows with a teenager, unnoticed until it was too late. It's impossible not to think about what could have been different, how many lives might have been saved if they had been caught just one day earlier, if the system meant to protect people hadn't failed in that moment. Instead, they ended up in a quiet corner of Georgia, a place where people trusted one another and never expected violence to this magnitude to find them. In a small town like Donaldsonville, the Alday murders became more than a crime. They became a wound that would never truly heal. Families who once left their doors unlocked began to sleep with shotguns by their bed. Farmers started to look over their shoulders. No one felt safe. The fear lingered all across the Georgia town, reminding everyone that even the safest places can be touched by darkness. Yet, in the aftermath, the town showed a quiet resilience, holding on to faith, family, and community to pull each other through the unimaginable. And through it all, the Alday family's legacy became a call to remember the human lives behind every headline and every courtroom proceeding. Their story changed laws in Georgia, ensured victims' families would no longer be forgotten, and inspired advocacy that continues to this day. The name Alday still means something in Seminole County, and when it is spoken, people pause, remembering not just the horror of what happened, but the strength of a family and a small town that refused to let the darkness define them. One thing is certain, while the final judgment was carried out in the Alday case, the story of this family and the lessons it carries for justice, community, and the cost of violence are far from over.